Hello, beautiful souls. I am Rhea Joyner, and welcome back to my channel. Before we get started, I need to apologize because I have missed the last 2 weeks of posting. That was not done on purpose. I've been recuperating, so I'm a little bit behind, and hopefully that will never happen again. So I want to apologize. Betting is something that all of us do at one time or another. Whether we're betting a little kid in the neighborhood that we can beat them to the stop sign, or betting that the Redskins will beat the Cowboys, we all have bet at some point. And usually, to make an educated guess or to make smart bets, you would use statistical data. If there's a 99% chance of something happening, like let's say rain, it's a 99% chance that it's going to rain. So we're going to wear a raincoat. If it's a 1% chance that it's going to rain, 9 times out of 10, we'll leave that raincoat at home. I am the mother of two boys, 33 and 19. You heard me correctly. I waited 14 years to give my son a brother. In the summer of 2005, I was 34 and pregnant. We decided to go to New Jersey for a family reunion. On the way back, we knew something was wrong. I told my boyfriend at the time that I needed to stop and get some feminine products because I thought the baby was pressing on my bladder. And we drove from New Jersey through a couple of different states. And I reminded him, hey, I really need you to stop. But looking at my face, he knew something was wrong. We finally got off on this exit in Baltimore, and we went one way first, and there was nothing really there. So we turned around and came the other way, and there was a gas station. So we went into the gas station. I found some feminine products, and I called my mother. At the time, my mother did not have a cell phone. And normally, when I would call her house, if the caller ID showed my number, my stepdad would let it go to voicemail so that my mom could hear it and respond. But this particular day, when I called, he did not let it go to voicemail. He answered the phone and let me know that my mother was with my aunt. I called my aunt's cell phone, and immediately after hearing my voice, she handed my mother the phone because she knew something was wrong. When my mother got on the phone, I let her know that I felt like I was peeing on myself. And she said to me, Rhea, your water has broke. You need to find the nearest hospital immediately and do not get out the car. Let them come get you in a wheelchair. We asked the guy at the gas station, and first of all, when she said that to me, I was really surprised because I was 21 weeks pregnant, 21. And as most people know, a full pregnancy is 40 weeks. So at the time that this happened, I could legally still get an abortion in most states because it's not a viable fetus until 24 weeks. When she said to me my water broke, I was really not believing her. I was thinking in my head that, this is something simple, pressing on my bladder, is fluid coming out, whatever. It's just not that serious. But I did listen to my mom. So after we hung up with her and left the gas station, we asked the gas station owner if there was a hospital nearby. And he mentioned that we were 2 or 3 blocks away from Johns Hopkins Bayview. We drove to the hospital, to the emergency room, and not listening to my mom, I did get out the car because I figured I would have to sit there and wait for him to go in, get somebody to come out, go through all that. So I went on and got out the car. We went into the hospital. They wheeled me up to labor and delivery. And as soon as we opened the door, the nurse asked, "How many weeks are you?" And I said, 21. And she responded, "Ooh." And I responded by bursting out in tears because what is wrong? What's going on? I had no idea. Now you're making me nervous. We go into the room for me to be looked over by the doctor. And upon reviewing everything and asking me some questions, the doctor let me know that my baby was not viable and that it had to be aborted. I was screaming even louder then. At this point, my boyfriend had called my mom back, and so she was on the phone and she heard what the doctor said. And you could hear my mother screaming from the phone, "Do not let them touch her. Call her doctor right now." We did. The doctors left the room while we were doing this, and we called my doctor in Richmond, Virginia, Dr. James Jones. He is amazing. And he explained that there was one of 3 reasons, and it's so crazy because I never remember the third. I know he said there could be an infection in the womb. Um, it could have the womb could have ruptured, torn, and that's why I was leaking. And I can't remember the third one, but anyway, he did say that I would not be able to leave that hospital until I had the baby. But the baby had a strong heartbeat and they could not abort the baby without my permission. So we know I wasn't given that. Okay. The doctors came back into the room and they then explained what he said, that we could stay in the hospital. The body the body reproduces amniotic fluid, so it was not necessary to abort at this time because the baby had a strong heart. They also said that if the baby started to come as if I went into labor, there's nothing that they could do to stop it at this point because of what has already transpired. So I'm like, okay, it is what it is. I'll stay here. You know, I learned in talking to the doctors and continuing this process that he had a less than 1% chance of going home and less than that of going home without any major complications, like being in a wheelchair, not able to take care of himself, feed himself, that kind of thing. And so I just prayed immediately. I started praying. I spoke to my grandmother, and she reminded me that I did not need to listen to them, that God had this baby. The doctors are not the end all be all, and I just needed to pray. And so that is what I did day in and day out. When they wheeled me into the room that I was to stay in for the next 3 weeks, there was a picture on the wall. The picture that was on the wall was an exact copy of a picture I had sitting in my living room at that time. I had not even put it up on the wall yet. So, give you a little bit of background on that. From the time I was a little girl, I knew I wanted to be a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. My aunt, whom I love to death, she was a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha. She was always so poised and graceful. She's smart, just all the things I wanted to be as a little girl. Like I looked up to her, and that made me want to wear pink and green. The picture that was on my floor in my living room was an exact copy of a picture I received as a gift when I crossed Alpha and became a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha. So it made me feel in that moment like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Like all of this happened for a reason, and this is where I'm supposed to be. For the next 3 weeks, I sat in that room trying to keep from crying and being bored and just, laying in a bed doing nothing for 3 weeks. I had to endure listening to doctors and nurses giving me condolences for my baby that was still living in my stomach. It made me so angry. I refused to talk with them, I refused to communicate with them. The day I hit 24 weeks, I started to bleed. They had told me previously that at 24 weeks, they could give me a drug called surfactant that would help the development of the lungs because they don't develop until the third trimester. And I was just arriving there. 2 days later, I gave birth to 1 pound, 6 ounce Tajir Jamari Joyner Lee. When he was born, there were probably 30 people in the delivery room. They had the incubator and the NICU crew, they had the doctors and whoever else was there. I believe I pushed one time and he just kind of plopped out. Because he was so small, they could not even identify that I was really having contractions because he was tiny. When he came out, they asked me if I wanted to hold him. He hadn't even started breathing yet. It They ended up rushing him to the NICU, and I sat in labor for an additional 2 hours because my placenta would not come out. I was eventually rushed into emergency surgery because I started to bleed out in order to save my life. When I woke up from the surgery, the nurse and my son's father were both in the room as I was waking up from the surgery. And it was crazy because it was like stark white in my head, and all these colorful cartoon characters were running around in my head. So as they were waking me up, I said, "Am I dead?" And he responded, "Yes, this is God speaking to you, my child." Which was hilarious at the time, but I didn't laugh because I was still super drugged up. It wasn't until later that day that I got to go to the NICU and see my baby in the isolette, in the, yeah, whatever it's called. That was a moment for me. He was this perfect little human, and he would, like I said, he was 1 pound, 6 ounces. Most packs of meat, hamburger, chicken, most of those are bigger than 1 pound, 6 ounces. But for years, I always, when I saw something that was 1 pound, 6 ounces or close to that, I would always think about that. But this was the start of my 19-week journey in the NICU. I was extremely thankful that I was able to get a room at the Ronald McDonald House because they discharged me like after a day, after like one day. And I thought that when you had babies, you stayed in there at least 2 to 3 days. But they discharged me. And once they discharged me, I moved into the Ronald McDonald House that was closest to the hospital. I met so many wonderful people there, and they were going through their own medical journeys with their children. And some of them took their kids home, and some of them did not. Ronald McDonald House is one of the charities I make sure to support every year because they really do a lot of work to support families that are going through medical issues with their children. So, if you're ever looking for an organization to donate to, the Ronald McDonald House is a great choice. And I will put the information about donating in the description. But let's keep going. After a few weeks, Hurricane Katrina came. And I want to say it was about 2.5 to 3 weeks after he was born. I want to say it was somewhere around September 5th. But Hurricane Katrina hit. And on that day, the doctors and the nurses had a conversation with us. They pulled us in the conference room to let us know that at that point, they had given my son all of the help that they could provide. They'd given him drugs to help his lungs develop. They had put him on the strongest breathing machine. I think it was called an oscillator, something like that. And that at this point, they had done everything that they could do. The only thing left was for him to fight. They explained that they had done everything they could do during this honeymoon period after he was born. And now we had to see what he was going to do, if he was going to fight. I went into the room to nurse, to pump breast milk, and I was just boohoo crying because basically they were saying to us they didn't think he was going to make it through the weekend. And they were allowing us to stay at the hospital so we could be there when he passed and have a preacher or pastor at the desk, at the bedside with us. So as I went in the room to pump breast milk, I was sad. I was extremely sad. I was um, bawling, crying my eyes out as I was pumping, just crying, 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 crying. And I felt this strong wind come around me in the room. And then I heard a voice say to me, "Don't worry, he's going to be okay." And at that moment, it was very emotional for me because I stopped crying immediately because I knew my baby was going to be okay. But as I said prayers by his bedside every day, the Lord's Prayer, Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done. That line, in and of itself, I never really thought about it as to what it meant, right? But what if it was God's will for him not to make it? Because there are a lot of NICU babies that don't make it. And that wasn't what I wanted. So I didn't want to say that line in the prayer because it made me feel like, you know, I'm saying to him, I'm okay with him dying. And that's not what I wanted. But I did say the Lord's Prayer every day. I just changed that line. I came out of the room pumping and I spent the weekend at the NICU, which was really the only time they allowed us to stay, is when they think that the child is at, in his last days or whatever. We endured a lot during that time period. And for that, for that 19 weeks, I was alone. My son's father was a school teacher, so he had to be at school. He was fortunate enough that Tajir was born before school started, and he had a full week to stay up there with us before he had to report back to school. But once school opened, he would come up on Fridays, every Friday, and he would stay until Sunday night, sometimes Monday morning, and go back. So, other than the weekends when he was there or when someone came to visit, I was by myself every day, all day. And my routine, I got up in the morning, got ready, went to the NICU, did his morning care, which included them weighing him, changing his bed, um, sometimes bathing him, things like that. So I would help, they would allow me to help in that process, in those processes. I really enjoyed doing that because it allowed me to create a connection with him, even though he was um, in the isolette. There were people that made comments about me being too emotional about him at his bedside, like he could feel my emotions and I shouldn't be crying and I shouldn't be this or I shouldn't be that. And it was interesting to me because it was always the people who had never been through it that had the most advice to give. How do you give advice about something when you've never been through it? The nurses did give me a name of one mom who what had gone through what I was currently going through, and her son was out of the NICU. I think he was a little bit over a year old at that time. And she gave me some great advice about dealing with that situation. I did start to leave the NICU sometimes and do some scrapbooking, and I learned how to do that. And that kind of gave me a little bit of time to de stress. And she gave me great advice about how to handle the hospitals. During our stay there, Tajir had MRSA. He had a on the back of his leg, they had so many IVs in him that they ended up putting them in his legs and in his hands or and his, I think they had one in his head if I remember correctly. But the nurse had placed a IV in the back of his calf and apparently did not place it properly. So the medicine that was supposed to be going into him was burning out his skin tissue. He literally had a big gash, a hole in the back of his calf. Of course, they were extremely apologetic. They had a plastic surgeon come repair it to minimize scarring and that kind of thing. And they told me that as he got older, the scar would get smaller because he got bigger but unfortunately, it has grown with his calf. It is not smaller, it is a big scar on the back of his calf from where the nurse placed the IV incorrectly. There were so many nights of tears because I did not want to see my baby in pain. Being in the NICU and seeing what's going on with other parents, because it becomes a thing when you're there every day and you see the same people and you get to know each other. When you step out the room, when they're doing shift changes and stuff like that, or getting food together, you get to know people. And there were parents that I met there whom I watched at Tajir's bedside as they held their babies for the last time because they didn't make it or whatever. And I would just kind of be in tears, just emotional for them because of the fact that we both, I mean, we were all going through the same thing, and their journey did not end where I was hoping my journey would end. And there was a little bit of guilt from hoping that praying and wishing things over my baby and they just lost theirs and that kind of thing. Um, but I know I shouldn't feel that way or I shouldn't have felt that way.